Let me tell you a story. There was a brief time back in the 90s, after Pogs but before Pokemon, where kids my age became enchanted by the idea of raising digital pets on keychains. This short but powerful cultural fixation was centered around toys like the Tamagotchi or the Gigapet. Now, I was a Gigapet kid, so I'm not sure if it worked the same with the Tamagotchi, but when my pet got hungry, I fed it. When it soiled itself, I helped it to become clean. We played games together. When it did something I liked, I praised it. I invested time into keeping this pet alive. I remember waking up in the middle of the night to check on it with a flashlight to make sure it wasn't getting hungry. I remember my mind being blown when I finally got good enough to see my pet change its sprite from a baby to fully grown. The fact that I had successfully parented a pet long enough for it to grow up was a real accomplishment for me. Hardly any of my friends were able to do it. As children often did, I began to see my Gigapet as a true companion. I would imagine that if I sent it my thoughts, it could understand me. I imagined that when it smiled, it indicated genuine enjoyment of my company. And when I saw its little angel wings and a halo around its head, I knew it had died. It was still there, still looking at me, still moving even, but the halo and the wings meant that our relationship was over, and I would need to begin again. When I rebooted, I saw the next pet as being a fundamentally different creature, one with no memories of me, and one which required the reestablishing of our relationship from square one. Now, like I said, my friend group's obsession with the Tamagotchis and Gigapets was relatively short-lived. After a summer of being a responsible Gigapet dad, I was given a Game Boy Pocket, which stole my attention away with games like Link's Awakening and Super Mario Land. I eventually misplaced my Gigapet, and when I came across it months later, I found it completely blank, the small button battery powering it having run out of juice. There was no halo, no angel wings, nothing at all on the screen to indicate that something had once lived there. Strangely, when faced with this, what could accurately be called the true death of my Gigapet, I did not feel any of my earlier pangs of disappointment. Paradoxically, I only saw my pet as dead when the batteries were alive enough to tell me so. Now I was like 9 years old at the time, so this philosophical quandary and any psychological angst which might have stemmed therefrom was lost on me. I forgot about my Gigapet for a time. Then, almost 3 decades later, I began to play a game called Stardew Valley. In that game, I bought some baby chicks. Every morning, I woke up and made my way to their coop where I would feed them and let them out to play. I gave them each a head pat. They responded with a heart icon. I felt a sense of genuine closeness with these little chicks, and in that moment, long dormant memories from my 90s childhood rushed back to me with a more mature and mentally troubling demand for my attention. It was in that moment that I began to unravel, leaving me untethered from my relationships and convinced that I'd never truly loved anyone, and that no one had ever truly loved me. This is SideQuest, and this is the story of my Stardew Valley-induced existential crisis. I want to make it clear right from the start that my goal is not to make a video tearing down Stardew Valley. I really like this game. I think it's a triumph of vision and a truly impressive example of what can be done when a single developer puts their mind to something. The sprite work is iconic while maintaining a nostalgic charm, the characters are varied and diverse in their interests, motivations, and personalities, the breadth of features is vast, and the scope of its world is an order of magnitude larger than other farming sims offering similar experiences. And while Stardew is able to provide subtle critiques of the state of modern life, capitalism, and community, it does so without ever losing a sense of coziness that makes it a great game to play late at night with some tea. In fact, I think there's an ideal time and place for maximizing the enjoyment of a game like this. And since this is a video about love and the contexts where it flourishes, let's get into it. I know this game is like old now, but playing it only ever clicked for me on my most recent playthrough this year. I first tried playing it on the recommendation of my cousin way back when it first came out, where he described it as, quote, a Zelda Harvest Moon combo. But at that time, such a combo didn't interest me. I'd already played Harvest Moon years before. Plus, Stardew's controls felt clunky because I was playing on a mouse and keyboard, and in all honesty, I still had bad memories of Farmville taking over my Facebook timeline with spam from Great Aunt Eunice, so I was kinda down on farming sims in general at the time. The point is, I didn't give the game a chance when it was new and I was in my 20s. and while it might seem like a needless degree of introspection, I think there's a reason for that. Stardew Valley 1.0 released in February of 2016. At that time, I was 25 years old, living in a rented bedroom with 2 other roommates who I found on Craigslist, and a cat that we took in off the street. Looking back, I don't consider it to be a bad time in my life. The people I lived with were cool, they had interesting stories to tell. My landlord kept the rent cheap because he didn't care about maintaining the place, and it set up a lot of important future events. But it certainly wasn't a time where I felt particularly in control or stable, financially, socially, or emotionally. As my farm grew in that initial playthrough, a little voice in my head kept popping up going, "Wow, that's a nice looking farm you've built there. You done anything to improve your real life?" And I'd cry over my bowl of rice and beans and be like, "Dad, geez, stop judging me! I'm doing the best I can, God!" The point is, progress in the game was inexorably linked to the lack of progress I felt like I was making elsewhere. Rather than a way to unwind at the end of an otherwise successful day, Stardew Valley initially played out as some kind of strange procrastination seedling, where as the crops grew, so did my ignored obligations. So yeah, I played it for a bit when it came out, couldn't get into it because I was a mess, and I went on with my life for close to a decade. Okay, time jump. It's 2024. I'm on the cusp of entering my mid-30s now. Somehow, I've become a college professor teaching psychology. I have a wife. I have a son. I've learned how to cook many more dishes besides rice and beans, and even have money to heat and cool my home. My days are predictable. I teach my classes, I grade my papers, I apply for research grants, I write things and I talk about what I write. I find that what my life lacks in excitement, it makes up for with a sense of purpose. Am I the world-renowned musician or recording artist I strove to be at 22? No, but I don't mind the trades I've made to get here. I'm extremely lucky to be where I am right now, and I have no desire to be anywhere else for the foreseeable future. This is also the year that I bought Stardew Valley for the Switch instead of the PC, and this playthrough has been a markedly different experience. Like before, I loaded up a brand new farm and got to work, but this time I was primarily playing at the end of the day, after my son was asleep or my professional obligations were completed. I don't know if it's a being in your 30s thing or a becoming a dad thing, but as I've been putting time into this playthrough, everything just feels different. I found myself motivated to seek out new areas, complete side quests, give gifts, and become a positive influence on Little Pelican Town. As of this sentence's writing, not counting the PC version I'm using to collect footage, I've put just over 100 hours into the game, and I've got what I think is a thriving little farm going on. More importantly though, this farm feels different than my initial playthroughs. When I turn it off, I sometimes have this stupid smile on my face because I discovered where to catch a red snapper, or I was able to connect with Linus over our shared love of the outdoors. And the chickens. I can't forget about the chickens. Those cute little chickens that eventually broke my mind. Don't worry, I'm gonna get to the chickens. The point here is, I didn't always love Stardew Valley like I do now, and before we get to the mind-breaking chickens, we'll first need to examine the process of human attachment. Why do we like some things, not like other things, and why do these likes and dislikes seem so often to change? To answer those questions, it's helpful to begin by looking at how we perceive our environment and process information. That's right, everyone. Those charming anecdotes were just distractions to lure you into a larger discussion about cognitive psychology. You've activated my trap card, Yugi boy, and now must face the educational consequences. It's time to dig into some psychology. Jesus Christ, what am I doing? In my real job as a professor, I teach a class on personality theories, and one of my favorite theories to discuss is personal construct theory, developed by George Kelly. For those of you who haven't taken my class, here's a basic rundown of his ideas, and also a disclaimer. My summary is necessarily going to be an oversimplification for the purposes of making a YouTube video. If, after watching, you find yourself interested in learning more about these ideas, please check out the description for reading suggestions. As always, my videos are here to whet the appetite, not be the main course. So, with that out of the way, who was George Kelly, and what's he got to do with Stardew Valley? Like I said, Kelly was a psychologist famous for coming up with personal construct theory. In this theory, rather than view personality as a collection of underlying and unchanging characteristics, Kelly framed personality as a result of information processing. A shy person, for example, isn't actually possessed with some immutable characteristic of shyness. Rather, they construct knowledge to anticipate experiences such that acting in a shy way is the inevitable result. To Kelly, the human mind acts like a naive scientist, storing information from experiences in order to predict the future. Personality is an act, not a trait, according to Kelly. The result of this information processing is the creation of constructs, which can be thought of as the mental lenses through which a person experiences the world. Let's look at an example. Let's say you're in a relationship for the first time, and your new partner ends up being unfaithful to you. It sucks, right? It's time to hit the gym and turn the emotional pain of heartache into the physical pain of exercise so you can forget about them and just move on. Only, do you ever really forget that person, their betrayal, or that pain? You might, from this experience, begin to look at new potential partners with greater levels of suspicion, or have a harder time being emotionally vulnerable or intimate with others. Maybe you even find yourself becoming more hostile and dismissive of a certain gender entirely. You're still you, but it feels like you're living in another world, suddenly filled with more danger and less love. According to Kelly, that change you've experienced is not the result of the objective world actually being any different, but instead represents a difference in how you construct or process your own psychological world. As humans, we don't really have a direct perceptual feed which connects us to an objective outside reality. Rather, all of our experiences and the resulting conclusions we draw about them are a result of how we construct the parts of reality that we access. And here is where things get interesting. It is necessary to live our lives in such a way that we assume that our perceptions of the world are, in some way, in line with whatever form the real world takes. When I look at my computer screen, I hear my fingers type on the keyboard, or I smell the tea on my desk, it doesn't feel like a complicated process, resulting from thousands of small calculations, or the integration of some data and the discarding of other data. It just is. Human perception appears seamless to us, and we experience the results of our sensation without seeing any kind of loading screen, which in a computer would imply the presence of background processes taking place. But human perception, and the conclusions we draw from it, is built from the ground up on just such background processes. You can look at any number of auditory or optical illusions to prove this to yourself, but the gap between perception and reality goes deeper than that. Some parts of reality, for example, simply exist beyond our ability to perceive. Visible light, after all, is just a small slice of an electromagnetic spectrum which includes X-rays and radio waves. Now, we have technology to measure these waves, but our interaction with them is always relegated to interfacing with that technology. Something real needs to be translated into numbers on a screen for us to know about it. Imagine if we could not just measure something like radioactivity, but could viscerally see it coming off of contaminated material as easily as we could see a flame. If we could have seen the damaging impact of an X-ray, we may have learned much more quickly to treat it with the respect it deserves. Reality is more than what we perceive, and when we fill in the blanks with technology, we do so with tools which do not provide us with the same sense of realness that we get from our biology. The Geiger counter tells me that this rock is dangerous, but damn, if that isn't a really pretty glow. My point is, everything you think you see is only there because you trust the output of your brain's processing of optic nerve signals. Everything you think you hear is a result of your brain's processing of information received from the auditory nerve. Every conscious conclusion you make about the world, everyone you interact with, all the emotions which shape your decisions every minute of every hour of every day are all based on your implicit trust in the way that your brain forms constructs about the world around you. Most of the time, this poses no problems because despite the incompleteness of our perceptions and the fact of mental construction, it is all enough to at least keep us alive. So what if when I run away from a bear, I'm really only running away from my mental construction of a bear, if doing so still keeps me safe? Other times, though, you pet a digital chicken in a farm game, and it gets a little heart over its head, and some part of you goes, "Ah, my chicken loves me." And when that happens, well, let's get into it. And so, dear watcher, we've arrived at last to the chickens. Let's talk about what's going on with these chickens, and what it implied about my social life as a whole. When I pet my Stardew Valley chickens, I became aware of a genuine and familiar feeling of warmth in me, a closeness not unlike when the stray cat I took in trusted me enough to fall asleep on my lap for the first time. Back in that old, cheap, and neglected apartment in Connecticut, that moment represented a real success. And at the time, I interpreted the feeling I had to be mutual. It was not just my feeling, but something shared between me and the cat who, peacefully asleep and purring, I assumed must also have been feeling some kind of analog feline closeness to me. Maybe I'm weird for that, I don't know. But most of the time, when I share a particularly vulnerable moment with another person, something similar to this is going on. When I hug a friend goodbye before what we both know will be a long time apart, there's this welling up of emotion. Maybe you felt it too, and that emotion would make me feel even closer to that person. In those moments, it felt like the emotion was not just my own. It was given to me and shared by another living soul. How amazing! Another human, capable of complex thought, feeling, and choice, with so many other potential things they could be doing, they chose to spend time with me and mark the occasion of their departure. Like I said, maybe I'm just weird, and as a psychology guy, I have a penchant for overanalyzing things. But during moments like that, the realness of the moment stood out to me. Surely, this feeling must be real, must represent something real, must only stem from a real and genuine relationship, right? That's what I thought, until the goddamn chickens had to ruin it for me. See, I don't know if you know this, but the chickens in Stardew Valley aren't real. They don't think. They're not really alive, and they can't really form any kind of emotional connection. In fact, much like my Gigapet monkey from decades before, they weren't even chickens at all, but a collection of pixels triggered by programming code, which itself was controlled by electrical impulses within the Nintendo Switch. I call them chickens because, according to Kelly, there's a construct in my mind that helps me to predict what chickens should look like, and those things on screen are close enough to those parameters that, while I play the game, they feel like chickens. But they're not. And yet I feel for them as if they are. On its face, this might not seem like enough to toss an otherwise halfway healthy mind into an existential crisis, but I can assure you, for me, it was enough. Allow me to explain. When I said the positive things I got from the chickens were similar to those which I felt during a time of connection with a living soul, I meant it. Maybe when you play games or watch media or interact with a simulated reality, your feelings are somehow distinct and different from those you feel throughout your everyday life. And if that's true, you paragon of logic and compartmentalization, you can feel free to exit out of this video now because what I'm going to get into isn't really relevant for you. But for everyone else, let's follow my descent into Stardew-induced madness. You see, I had been operating on the assumption that when I felt emotionally close to another person, I was sharing an emotion with that person. The other person contributed to my emotional experience as a result of their conscious influence on my presence. I might not be inside their head, but I was at least in contact with something real going on inside them. My internal feelings were being used as a kind of external reality test. My friends must be real, and feel real things for me because my feelings were real and present. I think, therefore I am? More like, I feel, therefore you are. And that's a fine ethos, I guess, until I felt the same feeling when in contact with something which I knew fundamentally was not real, like, say, a simulated chicken on a television screen. In the moment I truly understood my closeness to the chickens, a terrible truth became clear. My emotions were never produced by the people that I loved, and were never evidence that they were feeling anything at all related to what I was feeling. It was me, the whole time. Me constructing a reality similar to, but not exactly congruent with, reality as it objectively existed. The chickens did not care for me at all, and no amount of my silly sentimentality could change that. In an instant, the touchstone I'd been using to ground myself into what I thought was the real world could no longer be trusted. Sure, it was easy enough to relinquish my presumed connection to the chickens. They weren't real after all. But if my feelings in response to them were similar to, say, my cat, did that mean that the connection I assumed that we had was also illusory? And if I allowed myself the thought, the feelings of love I have for my cat were not fundamentally distinct from those which I felt towards my family. There were differences in intensity, sure, but I could no longer assume that they represented some kind of unique feeling shared with another person. It was as if my entire conceptualization of love had evaporated in an instant, replaced by some kind of solitary and ersatz stand-in. Had I ever loved anyone else? Had I ever actually been close to anyone else? All those moments where, in my heart, I was convinced that two souls had never before been closer or better acquainted. Was that all an illusion? Whose lips do I feel when I kiss someone? My lover's, or my construction of who I take my lover to be? Suddenly, I understand what all of my love has been. I look into what I call my lover's eyes and notice what I've called love, but it is not love, it is me. I am the eyes, I am the lips, I am the love. Have I ever really known anyone? And perhaps, most horrifyingly of all, If my experience was not some kind of strange outlier born out of a quirk of wiring, if it was in fact generalizable to the population at large, has anyone ever really known or loved me? The idea that humans desire a closeness that they can never have is not a particularly novel idea. Philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer coined the idea of the hedgehog's dilemma, where, like two hedgehogs desiring to seek impossible closeness because of the guarantee of spiky harm, so too must humans pine for closeness but live in isolation. But that idea, while psychologically interesting, is not really what I'm getting at here. I'm saying that because of the reality of our limited perception, it is impossible for me to be sure that I'm really sharing an experience with anyone else. And I really, really want to know that my experiences are shared with others. But what am I to do? Once the constructed nature of my reality began to reveal itself, it felt for a while like I was not actually in contact with reality at all. It was like I was forced to translate life through technological means, much like the person who can't see radiation but concludes it's there because of the number on his Geiger counter. Only this time my senses, once seen as direct feeds into reality itself, were now the very technologies providing me with evidence that I was never in touch with the real. To be conscious, to understand and become aware of the complex systems around me, I needed first to place myself outside of them. As Tor Nørretranders concluded in his book The User Illusion, the view from within a system is fundamentally different than the view from without. For a while, as I've alluded to, this bothered me. But as I've struggled with it, it's become less upsetting. So what? Maybe I live in a simulation of my own unconscious design. Maybe I've only ever fallen in love with the idea of people, and my emotional mind is so feeble that it can't reliably distinguish between reality and fantasy. But, and I'm aware this might be a cop-out, maybe that's good, actually. Living within my constructed world means that I have a degree of control over my experience that actually surpasses that which I would have had were I to depend only on reality for conditions for my happiness. Let me break it down for you by returning again to Stardew Valley. I'm a pretty prolific gift giver in that game, and an incorrigible flirt if I'm being honest with myself. I'm just a sucker for a good romantic cutscene, okay? Especially if that romantic cutscene came after some effort on my part. It took me several botched attempts at gift giving to realize that Harvey liked salads, and those mistakes resulted in my feeling as though our relationship was earned. Or what about when I was privileged enough to receive a sculpture from Leia, who created it because of her growing feelings towards me? From the perspective of the real, none of this happened, but from the perspective of my constructs, they did, and were enjoyable. Looking back, when I first had my existential crisis playing Stardew, it was because I was holding on to some flawed premises from the jump. I thought that a connection to the real was a prerequisite for real happiness. Now I understand that I've never had a connection to the real, and that's what allows for these events to produce happiness in me. I don't need the real to be happy. I don't need the real to be genuine. I've never had it, and yet not having it is somehow sufficient. I believe it was the incredible philosopher Syndrome who made history by stating that, when everyone's super, no one will be. This might be true, but I think that its inverse is true as well. When no one is super, everyone can be. So it is with my obsession with Stardew Valley and the real. When everything is constructed, nothing will be. And once nothing is constructed, everything can be real. So these days I pet my animals, I water my plants, I go to work and share moments with my son. I make sure that I contribute to community events. I try to share with others who have less. I try to keep my friendships strong, and I remember birthdays when I can. I smile when my neighbors send me cards. I teach, I read. I try to inspire those around me to ask questions and to learn about themselves. Here's a challenge for you. Somewhere in that list I was talking about my life in Stardew Valley, and somewhere in that list I was talking about my life in our world. Which was which? There was a mix of both in there, but I see the distinction as less and less important over time. Is Pelican Town real? Is my life real? It doesn't matter. They've become interchangeable. I'm real, I think, and my consciousness is the through line between them both. But my ability to enjoy both of those events diminishes neither. Once everything is constructed, nothing will be. And once nothing is constructed, everything can be. So where do I go from here? What's the point of all this? Writing this script has been a slow and frequently plotting process. I know what I wanted to say in this video, and I think I've done that. I wanted to give folks an introduction to sensation, perception, personal construct theory, and tie it all to a game that I like to play and put out a video and see if I couldn't open some people's eyes and teach them something new. My initial intentions were simple, but they opened the door to a discussion about which I feel much less authoritative. I want to make these videos to inspire questions, to contribute in my own little way to elevating the way people think about themselves and the world. I value curiosity, and I wish to cultivate it in myself and others. But as I've already highlighted, these goals are adulterated by constructs within my mind. And it is here that I think one final reflection, this one on the relationship between creator and audience, is appropriate. Who are you, dear watcher? Do you have a favorite color? What is your reason for viewing this little video on this little YouTube channel? In my mind, you have your reasons, and that's why I wrote and structured this video the way that I did. You're a person, with a person's complexities, but in my head, you're a construct. I've constructed you to be inquisitive, open to discussing new ideas, perhaps possessed with your own struggles, but doing the best you can with them. I've also constructed you to like me, because I'm uncomfortable being disapproved of. I've constructed you to be kind, because I want more kindness in the world. I've constructed you with curiosity, because what's the point of sharing yourself to an incurious or unreceptive audience? Maybe I'm correct in these assumptions that I'm making. Maybe the almighty algorithm has so attuned itself to my desired audience that the people who find this video are already possessed with the kinds of traits I believe them to have. But I have no way of knowing that for sure. All I have are my constructs. Who knows who you are? Even though I've done my best to resolve this tension between the constructed and the real, it hasn't gone away completely. I want to feel confidently connected to my fellow humans. I want true closeness. I want to know others. And my constructed reality appears to resist this possibility. But then, maybe my construction of you is a feature and not a bug, and there is room for genuine influence upon the real after all. It's just measured more abstractly. In order to examine this, the final point in a video which has become way more involved than I expected it to be, we need to look at one final construction, one which I've neglected to mention until now, but one which is still rather important: the construction of my own identity. All of the scrutiny I've been bringing to bear on my constructions of the real world could also be applied to how I view myself. As I go about my day, my choices are all moderated by an internal model of who I perceive myself to be. But the conscious ideas I have about the kind of person I am often fall short. They reveal themselves to be just as artificial as my constructions of others. When I falsely predict what will bring me happiness, when I make a choice which runs counter to my stated values, when I look back on my life and ask, how did I even get here? The influence of the unconscious, of my true self, becomes obvious. Who am I, and how do I know? There are parts of me which exist regardless of what I think about them, and there are parts of me which I want to exist but might not. In humans, there's a tension between the aspirational and the actual, but there's also a connection, and it's an important one. My construction of myself is not the whole of who I am, but it absolutely influences the whole of who I am. When I view myself as a professor, I act and dress like a professor. When I view myself as misunderstood, I begin to isolate myself from others. When I view myself as lucky, I find it easier to count my blessings, and I find myself to be luckier. All of these views are not the whole of me. They're constructions of an identity, and like my constructions of the world, represent an incomplete picture, something less than the real. But despite their incompleteness, despite their limits, they still exert an influence on the person I strive to be. Constructs don't just influence my personal reality, they influence reality itself, even if I can't reliably measure it. And here, I think I can really say I've made peace with my inherent distance from reality. Because if my constructs can influence the real me, then in my own small way, they can influence the world at large too. Maybe you're not curious or kind, you fucking jackass. Maybe it's just by random happenstance you clicked on this video and watched this far. Maybe I've said something that annoys you. But maybe, even just unconsciously, you've picked up how I've been constructing you as a viewer. Maybe my belief in the best of you has put you into a more positive state of mind than when you started this video. Maybe my construction of you will help to shine a light onto the best parts of the real you. Maybe by assuming you have positive traits, those positive traits become more easily accessible. Maybe in the end, that's how we influence each other. not because influence requires a connection to some objective reality, but just because I said so. Let there be light, it's been said, and lo, there light is. Thanks for watching, everyone. Until next time, this is SideQuest, where every digression is a progression.